Do we have any suggested topics?
I have some. I have some follow-ups.
All right.
And,
What I did in my quarantine.
the third one is magnetic hooey.
I continue to be disturbed by the increasing irrationality of the people in this country.
Yep, getting downright scary.
I mean, if our group is about sanity and rationality, we're losing.
John,
Yes, sir.
do you get physics today?
No.
Oh, okay.
What do they say?
Huh?
What did they say?
Oh, there are some letters this week, this month. Earlier this year, there was an article about how Trump ruined science or, damaged science. And they are mostly replying, of course, in the con. One of them even said, hey, there's too much denigration of I'm having a little senior moment at the moment. Who's that guy? How do you identify him? He converted the George Marshall Institute into one solely about advocating more CO2.
Oh, that sounds like a wonderful thing.
Well, yeah. I mean, he is a first-class denier. And he's a member of the National Academy of Sciences, and he earned that. But it's not in anything having to do with climate. And in particular, he's writing this theme of more CO2 means everything's going to grow better, ignoring the side effects of CO2 in the atmosphere.
Yeah, and droughts. Plants, love the CO2, but they don't like droughts.
Well, that too. Of course, I don't think he's been to New Mexico lately, and maybe not even into the. He's a professor emeritus from Princeton, and the name just escapes me.
It's not Karen Kirk, is it?
No. Forgotten what work he did to. It had something to do with atomic physics, and I mean atomic, not subatomic.
Spectroscopy?
Huh? Yeah, something like that. I can't remember the details right now. I was not familiar of his work or even of his membership in the academy until he started spouting a lot of climate denial stuff. And Trump appointed him to some advisory capacity in the White House for science. Not the science advisor. I think he actually did a fairly good job for the science advisor, but dang. Well, anyway.
Okay, William Happer.
Yeah, that's him.
William Happer, Trump's pick. Hey, let me share screen.
What's that?
I've got it on my screen here.
The Physics Today letters?
Yeah. Oh, no, just who that guy is. Uh-oh, I'm trying to...
Oh, yeah, right.
somebody, and now I can't see him.
I don't know whether he stayed in that position. There was so much
Eddie
feedback.
Jacobs. Okay.
What's that?
Eddie Jacobs just chimed in.
Oh, yeah.
So there he is. Trump's pick to lead his new climate change panel says CO2 has been demonized. Wow. Scary looking guy. Okay. All righty.
Where was that thing you were showing just now, Dave?
So that was, I was just looking in the news for Trump climate change pick. That is something from the NRDC called On Earth,
Okay, all
Culture
right.
and Politics.
I have a vague recollection that
From
he may not have
March.
been kept on that panel because of so much feedback, but I may be wrong about that.
Okay. Well, that was pretty interesting. So I got a couple follow-ups, but let's hear from anybody else that wants to go. And if you want to go off the record, where this won't be on YouTube, just let me know and I can pause the recording.
Have you checked out the most recent and very clever idea of Representative Louis Gohmert, a Republican from Texas? He will solve the climate change problem.
All we have to do is change the orbit of the Earth.
No, just change the orbit of the Earth.
Just make us a little farther from the sun. That
Well,
should
there
be
you are. Job done.
very.
Yes.
NASA. They could give NASA some money to study how much energy that would take.
Yeah.
But
Or Bruce
my
Willis.
knowledge of orbital mechanics, I think it's not gonna be just a little A-bomb on one side of the Earth to move its orbit.
No, it's easier than that. All they have to do is legislate, I think, a different value, a smaller value for the gravitational constant, G.
If gravity is a law, then it can be changed, right?
Well,
It's not in the federal statute, so
Amended, yeah. Amend the law of gravity. I like that. Okay. Well, thanks, Bill. That was awesome. You got any horror stories from the last year of coffee that you want to spill your beans on, or?
Oh, the entire last year has been a horror story, but I don't know if you know, but I was doing a COVID podcast all year long. I did 37 episodes, and a big chunk every single time was stamping out the latest myths. I mean, they just
yeah.
proliferate. And so many of the things that people believe are just easily disproven or looked up or something. None of them are like tricky to solve. Like, why masks work? How difficult is that? But I had to run videos and things like that.
Or 5G causes COVID, or
Well, that's clearly true. COVID gets transformed into electromagnetic energy and beamed into your lungs. I mean, that one's pretty straightforward.
and the nanobots that they're injecting via the vaccine.
Well, actually, Dave, you raised a really good point. The 5G, which is wrong and ridiculous, but not in the way that you think. The idea wasn't that the virus was being transmitted by 5G, but rather that the higher energy wavelength was somehow going to impair your immune system. And this is an example of where people think if a little of something is this way, then a lot must be that way, or vice versa. So yes, if you put somebody in a microwave for a while, bad things will happen to them, including their immune system. And there is a little bit of laboratory data that you can affect immune cells by firing concentrated microwave beams at them, which shouldn't surprise anybody. But from that, they extrapolated that the shorter wavelength 5G would impart more energy to the, I guess, white cells of the immune system and impair its function. So it's still wrong in so many ways, like you'd lose count if you tried, but not quite as ridiculous as your first thought, which is, do they really think viruses are being transmitted by 5G? I think some people did, but no, that wasn't the basis of the theory.
It's got an additional layer of plausibility.
Yeah, to the level of like science fiction, maybe.
Yeah.
a nurse has come up with the fact that people who have been inoculated for the COVID become magnetic.
Yeah, there was that video.
Very magnetic.
And that was proof that there were microchips in the vaccines.
Right.
Well, I don't know if you guys know this. I'm not sure if it's come up, but I'm a physician, and I'm really upset that in some places, upwards of 30% of healthcare workers are declining to get the vaccine because
Yeah.
of, things like this. And some of that has to do with the fact that some of the healthcare jobs aren't really trained in a sciencey way. They're trained as a series of protocols and so forth. So they don't ever really learn scientific thinking. And in fact, they consider physicians snobbish for emphasizing science as a core component of medicine. That's actually not a universal value in healthcare. It's a physician value that others might or might not choose to buy into. That's kind of scary to me.
Yeah. And then there's the rogue physicians that go off on their own little pipe dreams too.
Yeah. I mean, there's not very many, but they're so high leverage that they create a problem for all of us.
Yeah. And then
One
those
little comment
Dr.
about
Walls.
getting the world vaccinated. It seems to me like that large numbers of people who have not had the vaccine are walking around basically forming evolution factories. So that if there's going to be a place that creates a bunch of really nasty variants, it's not going to be in the United States. It's going to be in places like India. And so it behooves us to help them to get their people vaccinated. And yet the number of vaccines that have gone their way is pitifully small. And yet you don't hear a whole lot about this. There ought to be this big uproar that says that we need to get the whole goddamn world vaccinated ASAP.
Well, I've heard about it, but there's not enough people acting on it.
Well, I think like the rest of everything with COVID, it's been treated as a political rather than a scientific problem. Scientifically, I think the way to tackle it is to, and we have the models for this. Epidemiologists have had computer models for these kinds of things for a long time. Just look at different vaccination strategies, find out which ones reduce death by the most, or even if you're going to be Trumpian about it, which ones reduce American deaths by the most. And you still should see that we have a vested interest in helping other countries control their pandemic.
Yeah.
Because what is it? 3% of India has gotten at least one vaccine.
Wow.
That's awful.
I mean, that's pathetic.
Yeah.
Plus, they have a few more people than we do.
Is that why you said you think new variants will come from India? Just more opportunities for the next mutation?
Yeah. I mean, if you've got 1.5 billion evolution factories, there's much more chance for some exotic variant to show up there than it would be, if our population that remains unvaccinated is 60 million people or something like that, compared to their 1.3 billion people.
Yeah, fair enough.
Run the arithmetic, right?
Yeah.
You'd think that the modelers would be all over that one.
Modeling doesn't seem to have been used very extensively. I think Fauci's using it a little, but I really haven't heard a lot about people modeling. There was, I'll try to find it for you. There's a site that is doing some modeling, but not sort of in the diffusion of virus way that I'm thinking of. But I'll look them up for you while we're talking. It's an independent group. It's not a government group.
Okay. While you're looking for that, I had an update on our topic from last month, the magnetic water conditioning. So we tried to, and I'll pull it up here. I think I've got a picture of it. Okay. And here it is. So we worked up this ad to put in this. Here it is. I'll embiggen that for you a little bit. So there's this free handout called New Mexico Marketplace. And it's a flyer, and it comes out every month. And every month it has this full page ad on the magnetic water conditioning. And there's Larry Brown, the guy that we saw get debunked by Larry Barker last month. And so here's the picture from this month. And it's, basically he probably helps the systems by, knocking scale out of the hot water heater. And that's why his customers think, wow, this stuff really works. But the magnets aren't doing a darn thing. So we approached that New Mexico marketplace and said, we want to run an ad. And at first, my resolution was too low. And so I had to redo the whole thing at 300 dots per inch. And I finally got the size right and the resolution right. And then Larry Barker said, oh, please don't mention KRQE. And, it's okay if you mention me, but, we can't have this ad look like it was sponsored by KRQE because the lawyers. And so we fixed the ad up, and he was kind of busy, so we missed last month's deadline. But a couple days ago, he called up and said, "Yeah, I thought about it, and as long as you don't, as long as you make clear KRQE is not sponsoring the ad, it's okay." So then I went. And I'd been negotiating with Rena, the person at the New Mexico marketplace, who said, no, the resolution's not right. We need 300 dots per inch. And after, Larry had finally okayed it. And so here's her response. After further consideration, owners' discussion and council, we're exercising our right to refuse any advertising and won't be accepting this ad, which, and just like you can't tell Facebook, that they have to have Trump on there. Why we can't tell Rena that she has to run this ad. But it turns out their relationship, Rena and Larry Brown, the magnetic water conditioning guy, they have had yeah. So here is a still from the 2005 video from Larry Barker that. And about halfway through, there it is, New Mexico Marketplace. He has been putting his full page ads in that thing for 16 years. And I can see why now that they refused. This guy's like one of their top customers, even though our ad did not mention him by name. So there you have it. We got refused on that one. Okay.
I wonder if 60 Minutes would like to see all of that.
60 Minutes. Oh, there's Randy Truman. So then yesterday I said, man, we ought to try to see if the Alibi will publish something. So I went to look for the weekly Alibi, and it's closed.
It's the paper is its replacement,
Yeah.
and they're clearly a clone of the Alibi. They're virtually the same, except not as big yet.
Yeah. So yeah, I found out it was the paper. I guess it's one of the city councilors that has started it. But they tried to buy the Alibi outright, and I guess that sale fell through. But it is a lot of the same people. So I'm going to hit them up with, hey, here's a little great story for you to look into. And then Frank Etzkorn, who was going to help us get that ad into the New Mexico marketplace, he was walking into Home Depot, and there was somebody at the entrance to Home Depot handing out magnetic water conditioner flyers. So yeah, if we can get some more publicity their way, I think that'd be great. But we're clearly not going to get it in the New Mexico market.
Well, for that matter, why don't you forward a lot of this information to Home Depot and Lowe's?
Ooh, that's a good idea. Ooh, great idea. I'll have to ask Frank which one it was. Okay. So who's got something else? I got a couple more, but we can take turns. Alrighty, I see Eddie is here. How, how's your year, Eddie? Oh, his microphone might not be working.
Nothing much on Eddie works.
Oh,
He's a neutron generator. Don't forget.
alrighty.
And too cheap to buy a camera.
All right. Did you have any stories of survival, Joe, that you wanted to share, or Randy? We're just swapping war stories here. Okay.
Jerry's
Well,
got
I actually
something to say. Well, what's with Jerry?
acquired COVID-19.
Huh?
I said I actually acquired COVID-19.
Wow.
Congratulations.
After they're getting vaccinated or before?
Well, I thought when I went into the test, I was going to help drive the clear, the positive, the negative results of testing up by one count, and then it came back negative. I mean, positive for the disease. I had no symptoms. Didn't have any symptoms afterward. I did have a cold, what I thought was a cold, felt like a cold, back beginning near the end of December, and then that cleared up the first week or so of January, and it was the 22nd of January when I took the test.
So have you gotten the vaccine?
Oh yeah, I'm doubly shot. So I'm triply immunized now, I guess.
Well, what I hear is the immunity you get from COVID itself is not as good as the immunity that you get from the big badass vaccine.
Correct.
Right. There was something early on in which they said, if you've had COVID and you got the first shot, then you're about as good as getting the 2 shots without COVID. Don't know whether that proved to be true or what, but
that is not the latest recommendation that I've looked up. They're saying that if you have had COVID, you still should get both doses unless you're getting the single unit Johnson & Johnson version.
Right. This thing that I saw was back when there was a shortage of the 2-shot vaccines. And so there was an argument going on that, hey, save the second shot for somebody who hadn't got anything and see if we can get them covered at least minimally before.
And that's actually not a dumb strategy at all. Like what you were saying, John, about India, that makes perfect sense because the single vaccine protection is 70s or 80s%, 80ish%. And that's actually better than the flu vaccine is most years. So it's not a ridiculous strategy to one dose people and try to get more saturation if vaccines are at a shortage. Here in this country, that is not the problem. Reluctance is the problem.
Not currently, like but India, it was at the time that I saw that.
Right. Yeah.
My son got kind of sick last March, and they wouldn't test him for COVID because although he had trouble breathing, he didn't have a cough, he didn't have a fever. And finally, when they would test him, he was negative. But he had allergies, and he was diagnosed with GERD. And later he developed something like asthma, and he has all kinds of these weird symptoms. So he thinks he had COVID and everything else. I said, well, it doesn't fit the science. So we argue about this all the time. Now, at the same time, I had something too, but it wasn't that bad. All it was is that I was incredibly tired for a month and couldn't do much. And my other son also had something, but it went away in a few weeks. And of course, my husband never gets this. So the question is it possible he could have had COVID? And right now, of course, you've all had both shots. But, as I said, we argue this, but I think, but you were negative, Teddy. How could you possibly, you couldn't breathe. Could it have been asthma, allergies, which he does have apparently. So, and now that I have a physician listening in, I'd be real curious to know what you think.
Yeah, certainly it is possible. I mean, there were some false negatives and some false positives. The first couple of tests that they rolled out the door were not vetted to the usual standards, which was partly because of a sloppy administration, and I'm happy to flog them all day long, but also partly because everybody was in a big hurry. You do make some compromises when you have a crisis on your hands. So sure, there were some overcalls and some undercalls at around that time. And we know that there is such a thing as long COVID syndrome. If that possibility continues to haunt you, it's reasonable to get him tested again now, because the antibodies would remain present, not guaranteed, but likely would still be present in his bloodstream.
Wouldn't that interfere with the antibodies that from the shots?
I do not know if they can differentiate that or not. If he's been vaccinated, that could fool it. Yeah, that's a good point.
But he wasn't the first he wasn't tested right away. They wouldn't test him because he didn't have the usual symptoms. So we might have been the second batch of testing.
Now, see, that's interesting too, because that's diagnostic testing. But one of the things we needed early and did not have was screening testing, where you won't actually screen people based on the probability that they'll be positive. You screen them randomly. Which would have changed a lot of the early numbers. In a way, it's good because the early numbers look scarier than they looked as we got a bigger baseline. In fact, COVID is plenty scary. At 10 times the fatality of the flu, it's a scary disease. But as pandemics go, this is as mild as it could have been. This is the difference between getting grazed and getting hit dead on by a bullet, And so as badly as we handled COVID, this was barely more than a trial run. It was real. We had to do all the things we did, but this isn't the challenge that a pandemic really can be. And we got off amazingly light considering how badly we responded.
Wow.
Yeah. Were there any places in the U.S. where they hit saturation on capacity of ICU and ventilators and so on and had to do triage?
Oh, yeah. New York got overwhelmed. Florida at one point. I think Arizona may have at one point. New Mexico was right on the red line, but we stayed just a shade on the right side of it. And we weren't there very long. And I credit that to Lujan, actually. New Mexico has actually been one of the front runners in terms of having an adaptive response to this pandemic. And honestly, I think Lujan is almost single-handedly the reason for that.
Coffee, would you comment on the fact that the fatalities from COVID per capita is not a favorable, in a favorable value for New Mexico? It's in the over 100. It was 4,000 and 2,100,000.
So while the overall caseload was lower than expected, and we did flatten the curve in a way that impressed the national statisticians, the Native American population and the non-white population in the country, it's flattened a lot since then, but they had a significantly higher mortality rate for about the first 60% of the year. And so that drove our numbers up. Everywhere, every socioeconomically depressed group had disproportionately high mortality rates. And that was for two reasons. One is after you get the disease, access to care. But the other is before you get the disease, things like chronic poor nutrition, poor self-care, distrust of the system. There were a lot of pre-existing, so there's way more diabetes and hypertension and obesity in socioeconomic groups that have struggled than there are in the more successful middle class. And all of those are risk factors. In fact, one of the things I still don't fully understand is that possibly the single most important risk factor was obesity. I did not see that one coming.
You know why?
There's a couple of interesting hypotheticals, but the short answer is no, I don't know why. Interestingly, fat distribution has an impact on the way that our immune system functions. But recall that women had a lower mortality rate than men, even when risky behaviors, alcohol and tobacco were normalized for. And that suggests that there's something different. It is thought that there's something different about women's immune response to COVID. Now, women have a higher percentage of body fat and also overall a higher percentage of obesity. So you would guess that if that meant anything, it would mean that obesity was protective. But gender and obesity punched in the opposite direction.
I have the impression that the one of the strongest indicators to mortality problems is being poor.
Yes.
And so because New Mexico is one of the poorest states in the nation, I think that that might explain a lot of the problems that we've had.
Right. That's what I was trying to say. Yes.
And that would apply both to the Native Americans and to a lot of the lower end folks that are maybe Hispanic or something like that, right?
Yeah. And unfortunately, in this country, poverty is strongly associated with being non-white. Now, there's a little bit of an illusion there. If you look at the average income of whites compared to the rest of the population, you can get numbers as high as 100 times. But remember how drastically right skewed wealth is in this country. So the vast majority of billionaires and multimillionaires in this country are white males. But it does not follow that the vast majority of white males are millionaires and billionaires. That would be affirming the consequent. Still, even when you account for that skew, the ratio is still something like 10 to 1. So the racial differential, I think, is humiliating for our country. COVID didn't cause that, but it unmasked it in a way that should have made it harder to ignore. People are succeeding, so good on us for being able to ignore the obvious, I guess, but it should have rubbed our noses in the inequities of our system.
But New Mexico seems strangely bimodal to me, because not only do we have this extreme poverty, but then we got places like the military bases and the national labs and all of that. And so there's a big pulse of wealth associated with the labs.
Yeah, and you see the pattern that you described. Among wealthier New Mexicans, it was less of a hazard. And of course, remember too that wealth and being Republican have some correlation. And so the net effect of that is that the group that already wanted to deny it was also suffering less intimate harm from it. So it made it easier for them.
I think relevant to Coffee's comments, I follow in Arizona because I have family there and grew up there. And of course, the northern half of the state is largely Native American and was hit extremely hard at the beginning of the pandemic. And I think probably drove Arizona's numbers for quite a while. But then the tribe reacted very strongly and got things much better under control. And then things flared up in the south around Phoenix. And I don't know whether that was more Hispanic and Native American in the Phoenix region or was pretty much widespread among everyone, probably largely driven by Republican contamination. But
yeah, the Native Americans pulled together really well on this. And in terms of community health innovations, Native Americans have led the country for a couple of generations now in a lot of community health initiatives. So yeah, once they started getting hammered by COVID, they actually responded better than most other groups, but it took them a little while to get back on top of it.
Yeah. I have another some statistics that I have been pondering over. Once we're vaccinated, my wife and I, everyone's pushing to go out and do things and be open just like before, and we're not comfortable with that. And so looking at some numbers, in New Mexico, a few days ago, there were 700 cases of positive testing after full vaccination out of about 1 million. And don't I don't know for sure if that's 1 million people or 1 million vaccinations. I think it's people, which would be like 700 per million odds of getting infected after you've been fully vaccinated in New Mexico. And I understand that's over the entire course of vaccinations. It's probably lessening as more and more people get vaccinated. On the other hand, I saw news articles that talked about the CDC numbers being roughly 3,000 people out of 135 million who were fully vaccinated. And I thought, could New Mexico have a quarter of the reinfections? That doesn't sound right. Looking at it more closely, the news articles were not clear that the CDC numbers were hospitalizations or deaths only, severe cases. Then that makes more sense. And it turns out to be about 20 out of per million of those vaccinated. So the difference is pretty clear that your severity of the COVID, if you catch it after vaccination, is going to be much less severe. 700 per million down to 20 per million.
Yeah, there were 3 parameters they were interested in. Does it stop you from getting it? Does it stop you from spreading it? And does it make you less sick if you do get it? And all 3 of the main vaccines just knocked it right out of the park on all of those parameters.
Unfortunately, the Delta version from India appears to work pretty well against that too. At least, I'm not sure which vaccine that was, but probably all 3. Well, back to comfort then. 1 in 1,000 chance of catching COVID now, even though I'm fully vaccinated, still seems pretty risky to me. Now, yes, that is just catching it, not having severe consequences, but we're both 70-ish and I'm obese. So I think it is a risk we have to watch out for.
Well, the CDC is weighing medical risk to human beings against economic risk to the country in balancing how much to close down and how much to open up. Nobody knows where the sweet spot is. At any given moment, they're erring a little on one side or the other because it's an indeterminate, there's not a sharp line, right? And like I say, not as much mathematical modeling has been done as I would have expected. It is clear that countries that don't respond to pandemics with at least partial shutdowns experience much more economic harm than those which do. We were going to get economically hurt either way, and we probably got less economically hurt to the degree that we responded, but a much more profound early response that didn't last as long would have been, most epidemiologists would say, would have been the ideal response. Yeah. As I say, we were just abysmal. Estimates that I've seen by epidemiologists are that 70 to 90% of the people, the Americans who died, didn't need to had we responded in the way that history has taught us to respond. You know, quarantine comes from a 4-week layover from the Renaissance. People knew that early how to do this, right? So it's not like this is a radical new invention from the left.
One of the things I think the government or the medical community needs to emphasize is that, you know, the side effects of the vaccine, like blood clots. One of the vaccines was said to cause blood clots, but if you look at it, COVID causes blood clots, and your chance of dying from a blood clot if you get COVID are greater than your chances of dying from a blood clot if you got the vaccine. So get the damn vaccine. And I think that needs to be, I think, just the simple, the vaccines will do this. They'll prevent you from getting sick and transmitting it to others. And, but, as it is with this huge sort of partisan divide, I think, we might even see the next election affected somewhat by how the different communities reacted to the virus and how many voters survived.
Dave,
Yeah.
your statistic about getting blood clots from COVID itself, is that only in the hospitalization cases, or is that those that don't require hospitalization, and in particular those that have the hospitalizations that involve ICU?
Really don't have the details on the demographics.
At the time that 7 million vaccines had been administered
Right.
of the Moderna, 6 people had developed this blood clot syndrome and had been identified, and one of them had died. So out of 7 million people during that same time frame, think how many got COVID and how many died and so on. The risk is absolutely not comparable. It's like saying if I were wearing bulletproof armor from head to toe, but you could see my eyes, well, I might as well just not be protected because maybe that's where the bullet will hit me.
Good analogy. Okay, I got one more follow-up. It's not COVID related. Does anybody want to share more COVID stuff before we move on?
Just one last thing. While we were talking, I did a search for did more Republicans die of COVID? And just like 20 articles popped up about a differential mortality rate from COVID based on political affiliation. So apparently, yeah, it made a difference.
Thanks.
I had one question for Coffee before we go on to other things. With testing, with the PCR type testing, what is the tail of, if you've tested positive well, I guess what I'm trying to find out is, did I only have an asymptomatic case, or is that a long tail from that so-called cold I had starting at the end of December and lasting a week into 2021, and then taking the test at the 22nd of January. So that's
the PCR test doesn't answer that question. It says that at some point you had some amount of that virus and your body dealt with it. To say that you have a long tail would be to say that you have chronic symptoms after that point that you didn't have before that point.
No, not really. What prompted that particular question? I have another one that's one I really intended to ask and forgot about. Looking at the Department of Health website, they have used to have anyway, an explicit statement to employers saying, don't require, after somebody has gotten COVID and then has let's see, how's it go? And gone through the length of time for the quarantine, like 14 days after last symptom. They warn the employers not to require another test before you go into work, because there can be a tail in which some fragments of the virus may be still floating around in the system and will be picked up by the test and give you another positive.
Yeah,
even though there's no
true.
active infection.
Yeah, and I don't know how long after the infection you could fool the positive test, but certainly I would agree that I would have waited at least a month. And honestly, I'd like to have some data. It might be longer than that.
Right. That's what I was wondering, if there was any data. The question that I couldn't remember at first was, are there any tests now that can assess the I'll put in layman terms, the strength of your antibodies at a particular time. I took, before I started getting the vaccinations, just kind of on a lark, I took a test for antibodies, and it just gave me a binary result. Of course, I had antibodies, but it didn't tell me anything about the state of my immunization state. Is there anything currently available for doing that kind of testing?
There is a positive but low coefficient of correlation, R value, for more antibodies, meaning better immunity. It's not very predictive. It's a low correlation. It's there. But it's a trend more than it's not tight enough to be predictive.
At the time I took the antibody test, it was a Tricor thing because they were the only people offering any antibody test, at least according to information supplied to me. And there was no indication in the report, at least the part I saw. I mean, they don't tell you, the individual, anything about that. They send it to your physician, and then he forwards some part. And it just told me, I did test for antibodies.
The test is not designed to tell us how immune you are. It's just designed to tell us if you ever had the bug.
Yeah, right. And my question is are there tests really that can tell you how immune you are?
Not outside of a research lab. They could put some of your blood in a test tube with, your antibodies and expose it to COVID or something, but none that I'm aware of. And certainly you'd have to be part of a research protocol.
Yeah. All right. I'm done.
All righty. Anybody else have COVID stories before we move on to? I got a perpetual motion topic. Just a real brief update. All righty, going once.
I thought you had something on that.
Okay. I was just making sure we were done with the COVID.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so let me share screen again, and this time pop over to Dennis Lee. So we've long had a page on Dennis Lee. He came to New Mexico several times in the 90s, early 2000s with his perpetual motion generator. The hummingbird and the Sundance, and he hooks them up together, and it supposedly puts out of all the power that it puts out, it only requires 20% to run. So you just take 20% of the output and feed it to the input, and pow, you got perpetual energy for as long as you want. And he actually, got people to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars. He did do some time, and Eric Krieg has been his perpetual debunker and naysayer. And so then Dennis Lee got into the auto mileage claims, and so one of the NBC shows, 48 Hours, I think, did just a blistering expose. And that really put a dent in Dennis Lee's operation. But he has resurfaced. So he's got a new scam. And here's an ad, the full page ad in the Wall Street Journal. Yeah, just last September 14th. And it's some sort of scheme for, here's how you can get health care for your employees at virtually no cost to you. And it's a scam. And so the new development is that the SEC has finally charged this health care company and its founder with a multi-million-dollar fraud. So Josiah David, formerly known as Dennis Lee. So that's our guy. So so that's a positive thing. I need to add this to our webpage. So any comments on that before I go to my last thing, which is a potential April Fool's prank?
In the spirit of sharing, have you sent information to the SEC itself about us and you? About
I'm
all
sure
these
they've been talking to Eric Krieg.
all these efforts about, you know, the magnetic water treatment and yada yada. Are they aware of what's been
That's a
going
great
on?
idea. Contact the SEC about this. Our guy Larry Brown.
Yep.
Great idea. Okay, I'm making note of that. Great. Okay. So last couple months ago, we were talking about what are we going to do for our next big April Fool's prank, and I've thought of one, but I'm a little conflicted because it might be too useful. So here's the idea: the flat earthers have a real big gravity problem, and so they basically just deny it, and they say, oh no, gravity doesn't exist. Newton contrived it to do something or other. And when you ask them, hey guys, if I take this steel ball and drop it 3 feet, how long does it take to fall? That tells us something about gravity. So the only possible explanation that the flat earthers have put forward is that the flat Earth is accelerating upwards at 9.8 meters per second, and that creates this acceleration force that we call gravity that points down. But you know, after just a few months, you'd be going faster than the speed of light, so that's a problem. So, but I was thinking about you know, Gauss's law and the divergence theorem and Stokes' theorem and all that, and you can model you know, gravity. Like Gauss's law works great for a spherical planet. You basically you have a surface integral of the field coming out of the surface of this sphere that you've drawn around the planet or sun or what have you. So you've got a surface integral of fields dotted with the surface of the sphere, your imaginary sphere, and that equals the mass enclosed, which you can calculate with a volume integral if you know the density, and it works great for spherical planets like Earth and the Moon, Sun and the Earth. But oh, here's Austin. If you had a cylindrical planet, Gauss's law would tell you how to calculate the fields from that, and it's not 1 over r squared anymore. It's 1 over r, and it's, in fact, it's very similar to sort of the magnetic field drop off. But then, so if you have a flat slab and apply, and it's infinite, so an infinite flat slab, you can apply Gauss's law, and you come up with gravity being a constant, not just near the surface, but you could go a mile up, and F would still equal mg. I mean, it would still be 9.8 meters per second squared. On the Earth, we know as we get miles up, the gravity gets weaker, and as you you know, get farther out into space, it weakens. So basically, my idea is to film. Maybe, you know, Bill would be a German professor, but just you know, have the derivation. What I've come up with is you could have layers of the flat Earth, sort of, you know, mud and dirt on the top layer, and then iron and uranium in the lower layers, and then on the bottom side, you know, have dirt again. But you could model like a density gradient and use our measured value of g, the 32 feet per second squared or 9.8 meters per second squared, and you could use that along with estimates of the density of these layers. I guess Austin's trying to chime in with some troubles. Welcome, Austin. Yeah. So anyway, my idea would be to explain gravity for the flat earthers, because it really, that you don't need to have this Earth accelerating upwards at 9.8 meters per second squared. You could use Gauss's law to say, here's what the gravitational field of an infinite flat slab of variable thickness is, and then you could estimate the thickness of the slab if you had some idea of the average density, or you could even have layers. So it would actually help the flat earthers be able to fool more people, because they would have finally an explanation for gravity that's not as ridiculous as the current one. So my thought was we could film this, get it on the YouTube, make it look like an old video of some professor talking about how he's calculated the depth of the flat Earth using Gauss's law, and then wait until the flat Earth YouTubers pick it up, and then show them the rest of the video where the professor confesses, hey, this of course the Earth is spherical, and you could calculate the why this model falls apart, which mainly as you got 10 miles up, G would be weaker on a spherical Earth. With this infinite slab, it would be just the same. It would be 9.8 meters per second up, even if you were 100 miles up. So that's my idea. What do you think, Bill? And would we be giving the flat earthers too much of an advantage, or would rubbing their face in it with the reveal after they've fallen for it hook, line, and sinker, would that be worth it? So I'm still pondering how to do that.
Dave?
Yes.
How would you get past the objection from the flat earther that Gauss's law is another invention that, some guy in the past invented but doesn't apply? I mean, it's an interesting exercise for those of us who believe in gravity and know for central forces that Gauss's law applies.
Yeah. Well,
but
I think what
they don't, as far as I can tell, they don't accept any of that stuff.
No, they say that Newton, just came up with this theory to patch up his flawed theories of motion or what have you.
Will they accept Gauss's law for electrostatics?
Yeah.
Oh, they do?
So what was the question about Gauss's law?
Do flat earthers, at least some considerable portion thereof, accept Gauss's law in the case of electrostatics?
I bet the vast majority wouldn't, because they would have no idea what that is.
Well, that's kind of at the root of my question, both questions, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, they've got no idea, no conception of the world they live in. And their only conception is, most of them, I think, my experience anyway so far, limited as it is, are fundamentalist religiously. Christian
you're onto something though, Gary.
What's that?
You're onto something. I can imagine setting up a video where you demonstrate this principle using a Van de Graaff sphere and a Venn diagram plane. First, the plane to show how the effect works. You'd have a huge sheet of metal that you'd charge up with a static charge and show the behavior of, say, a feather or a bit of hair or yarn or something in it. You see what I mean? And how it is invariant as you move away from that, at least for a while. And then do the same thing with a sphere that has the same initial charge on the surface and show how much differently the object behaves as you move it away from the surface. And then that might give them because that happens over a much shorter range.
Yeah.
And you could
right.
then use that to go to your animation about the way the force of gravity would behave differently over a plate than it would over a sphere.
And it
Because
can
the
be done in
principle-
a man-sized space, like a room or
Yeah,
even-
but my concern is what Dave is saying, because a lot of the memes that have gotten around over the last couple of years actually did start as parody pieces and got picked up as literal truth in alternate medias.
It's a tricky business.
yeah.
So I'm thinking if we did the film and then filmed a gotcha thing at the end that we would hold back, then if the flat earthers started promoting this in their YouTube videos, then we could say gotcha, and then every time somebody said, oh yeah, here's this new explanation for flat earth gravity, we'd be able to say gotcha. So anyway, that's worth thinking about before we do it. But
I had one question more about the flat Earth stuff. Somewhere, in fact, it might have been you, Dave, that, from whom I heard of it, either in writing or otherwise. A group of the flat earthers got this very expensive black box that they were going to use, and they bought it. They didn't manufacture it. To try and prove flat Earth.
I can tell you about that.
Okay, how did that work out?
So it's from a show called Beyond the Curve, which was produced for Netflix and basically about the flat Earth phenomenon. And so then Bob Knodel is one of the flat earthers. He's active in what's called Globe Busters.
Yeah.
And so Bob Knodel was describing, to the producers and on film how they had bought a $20,000 ring gyro laser, which is an extremely accurate ring gyro, and then they started, measuring it, and with the, they fully expected to see no drift at all of the gyroscope, and in fact it was drifting at 15 degrees per hour, which is 360 degrees per day, which is the Earth turning on its axis. So, and then they tried to put it inside like a magnetic shield. They thought, well, it's just the magnetism of the universe or whatever. That didn't help either. And then Bob Knodel was at a party, and somehow the producers of Beyond the Curve got video of Bob Knodel saying, yeah, we did this ring laser gyro experiment, and it turned out really bad, and we really have to be careful how we package that. So it was just a phenomenal face flop. And so Simon Dan, the flat Earth debunker, he has little clips. Like he's got a great clip from the airplane movies where everybody claps their head and the whole audience claps their head. It's a great clip. So when something especially stupid is said, he'll bring out that little clip. And so one of his 10-second clips shows Bob Knodel saying, yes, 15 degree per hour drift. Thanks, Bob. So yeah, that was a spectacular faceplant. And then the other interesting thing. They had another experiment at the end of the Beyond the Curve where they were doing holding up wooden objects with holes in them and trying to shine a laser. And so where the flat Earth, you should have seen this laser shining through the hole. They saw nothing. It was dark, and so two groups separated by a couple miles, and so they on the walkie-talkie said, "Well, hold up the laser higher." And when they lifted it up like to 17 feet, then they could see it because why? The Earth is round. So that was another spectacular own fail, or there's a word for when you
Onside.
Yeah, onside goal. Yeah. So that was that's a great, and in fact, I think you can still get that on the Netflix, Beyond the Curve.
Do you guys think they actually believe the world is flat, or is this some sort of enormous sort of prank meme or something?
So there are some that are actually genuinely sucked in, and in fact, we had Bruce Lacey, honest to goodness New Mexico flat earther. We had him come to NMSR, and we tried to talk to him about his theories, and mostly he just said, "Well, you guys are all part of this massive conspiracy, and why are you looking at the sky? Look down at the Earth. That's what's flat." So things like sunsets wouldn't be the same on a flat Earth. You can't argue with him about that. So it was pretty frustrating, but it's on YouTube if you want to see that. Ben Radford, I think, taped it for us. So the whole thing's on the YouTube. But yeah, a real life flat earther, and just I think these people become woke, and they think they're the caretakers of this wonderful theory that's going to prove that we've been suffering from this massive conspiracy for centuries, and they think they're helping humanity wake up to realize the truth. But it's same old conspiracy theories. The people that fall for these are the same people that think Biden stole the election.
One other question, Dave.
Sure.
Yeah.
And now I've forgotten what it was. So
Uh-oh.
I yield the floor.
No.
Oh, yeah. Spherical coordinates like the equator and parallels of latitude. What do they think about that? Is there an equator in their universe? And how do they determine what it is?
So the equator is the equator. I've got a picture of it. If let's see, let me go to. There we go.
So I'm going to guess this is the line the sun passes over as it crosses the flat Earth. The equator is the hottest part directly under the sun.
Yeah, so I think I've got a picture of it.
Depending on time of the year, that's a pretty big area.
This might not be the right one. On the flat Earth, the sun never sets. Yeah, here we go. Here is the flat Earth model. So basically, the North Pole is the center of the flat Earth, and so this map projection is just a polar azimuthal projection. It's a standard map projection. In fact, the UN uses it for their logo. But the flat Earth, so this comes up in some of the old texts where they compare results for the Eratosthenes experiment But basically, the idea is that the sun is 3,000 miles above the flat Earth, and it's going clockwise. And on the equinoxes, March and September 21st, it goes directly above the equator. So somebody on the equator in Ecuador, say, looking straight up at noon on March 21st or September 21st would see the sun directly overhead. Whereas somebody in the northern hemisphere would see it a little to the south. Then in our summer, the sun magically goes on a shorter radius. So instead of 6,000
Wow.
miles, it's going 4,000 miles. But there's no explanation as to why this journey takes exactly as long as that journey, even though it's over a much shorter distance. So is the sun going slower? They got nothing for that.
This model also
Okay.
predicts the
But
North
in
Pole
the
would be.
summer, the sun is so far to the north, it's directly over the Tropic of Cancer, that down in Antarctica, which is this big white wall of ice that is the circumference of the flat Earth. It's a 75,000-mile ice wall. And the theory is that there are ships, preventing anybody from sailing from South America or Australia to Antarctica. They'll run into these patrol boats and be arrested or turned back or what have you. So in the North Hemisphere summer, or winter rather, and the Australian summer, that's when the sun goes on a wider orbit. So 7,567 miles. It would be directly over the Tropic of Cancer on the
Capricorn.
Capricorn. I'm sorry, Capricorn. Yeah, and so that's when you have 24-hour sun in Antarctica, but the perpetual midnight in the northern hemisphere, simply because the sun is too far away from the northern hemisphere in December, and it's too far away from the southern hemisphere in June. And I think I've got a picture.
So this model could give you 24-hour sun in the north, but not in the south. And
Yeah.
also it predicts that the north would be much warmer than the south, the North Pole versus the South Pole. But actually the average temperature is higher in the south than the north hemisphere.
Not at the poles.
No, but the average temperature of the southern hemisphere is warmer than the average temperature of the northern hemisphere. And this model would predict the
northern
opposite.
hemisphere has more land area too. And then
Does that
Antarctica
get them out
has
of the
a whole
woods?
continent.
Yeah.
So this image right here is showing the flat Earth sun, which is this green one, and this is viewed from New Zealand in the winter. And so the red thing is the actual sun, which rises in the east and sets in the west. But you can see the flat Earth sun, as it's closer to you, it actually would look bigger. But the thing is horribly wrong, where the real sun rises toward the south from due east. The flat Earth sun never even gets as far as due east. So it's trivial to go out on a New Zealand winter day and disprove the flat Earth model. Yeah. Oh, I got. So here's the. There is a. I'm trying to get to it. There we go. So here's the day and night model, and so as the sun goes around, it's casting a spotlight, which makes day, and where it's too far from the spotlight, that's night, and the moon, is always supposed to be opposite the sun, but how can you possibly have an eclipse? So the fly in this ointment is, let me just get to my animations. So how do I make this smaller? Here we go. There we go. So here's it's just called the orthographic projection. It's a map projection. This one is straight above Socorro, I think. But this shows what night and day would look like if you were at, say, one of the satellites at the geosynchronous spot where you're just sitting above the same spot on Earth, and you see day and night progress like that. Well, here's that same thing on a Mercator projection, and we can see, yeah, Greenland is lit up, except for the southern tip of Greenland in the height of summer is going to get a little bit of nighttime, but the rest of Greenland just 24-hour sun. Antarctica, total darkness, and here's what it looks like on the so-called flat Earth projection, where the North Pole is at the center, and Antarctica is the 75,000-mile wall of ice, and it actually kind of works. It looks like that cartoon that they had, but that's in the summer. And then if you look at winter, oh man, it's all different. So here is the actual space-based view of what's really happening. At any time, half the Earth is lit up. You can see in our winter, most of Greenland is in darkness all day, except the southern tip of Greenland gets a few hours of daylight, and the tip of Alaska does not. It's above the Arctic Circle. So that's that looks an awful lot like the mirror image of what we had in the summer, and the Mercator projection. It looks an awful lot like, well, we just switched the blue and dark portion, the yellow and dark portions. Here's the sun going over Tropic of Capricorn, but for the flat Earth projection, here it is. I made these movies with Python, so instead of this part that was lit up before, sort of a plausible spotlight pattern. Now the spotlight goes all the way around the Earth, and it has this big night size, half of the Earth hole in it, a zone of darkness. So, what spotlight can cast a projected light that looks like that, a big thing that goes all the way over here, but somehow doesn't shine its light there. So yeah, just silly
So
stuff.
you could just
had fun making those movies.
Great job, Dave. That's really cool. You could just telephone your friend at a time when one model predicts that he's in daytime and the other predicts it's nighttime, and ask him, what's it like outside? Do you see the sun or not? Right?
Great question. Yeah. But anyway, there are real flat earthers. We met one. We did not get him to reason with us, so we gave it a good try, but wasn't possible. Alrighty, well, any other follow-ups? Hey, next month we have a great meeting coming up. Let me screen share that. But it's in the newsletter. But that is going to be Mick West, who was our speaker in person in February of 2019, before all the pandemic stuff. But he has really been on top of all the UFO, UAP videos that are coming out of the military and the government. So he's got some great answers for the flying pyramid, the FLIR, the Go Fast, the gimbal, and he's been on CNN. He did a special thing with the Skeptical Inquirer. So this should be a rock and roll fun meeting where we get to the bottom of this UAP UFO enigma, and mostly these things are infrared cameras. It's not the same as a regular camera. People are misinterpreting objects that are much closer than they think. And if you think it's far away, it's going to look like it's going fast. And the pyramids, that's something called bokeh, where if you have a camera that's very out of focus and it has a triangular aperture, then if you're looking at, say, Jupiter or a star, it's going to appear like a triangle of light. And in fact, any small bright light source like a star or a bright planet will have a pyramid shape, a triangular shape. So, and he's demonstrated that very well. So that'll be great fun next month. And then we should think about, are we going to start? When are we going to start having meetings in person again? I think we've got an August speaker, but September, should we start meeting again? We could require everybody to be double vaccinated to come to the real meeting. We're not in Florida, so I don't think we'd be arrested for that.
Or Georgia.
Yeah.
Dave, I think the task people are having trouble finding a venue right now, so that might be something to think about too.
Might be. I should give the restaurant a call. Where we left off was we were just starting to meet at the Copper Canyon.
Oh.
And so we should revisit CNM. Maybe with this pause, we can Mark Fraser can get his old connections at CNM going.
Yeah, I prefer that. I can get there on time.
Yeah, so I'll see if I can stir Mark up and get him to probe the waters.
Okay.
But I'll also give the Copper Canyon a call. Anyway, probably won't be till September. Alrighty. So, any other comments before we call it a night? That was a fun conversation. Thanks, everybody.
I learned a lot. Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I enjoyed it too.
Yeah. Well, it's been a heck of a year.
Hi, Dave.
Hey, Joe. How's it going?
It's going good, thank you. Unfortunately, my wife just passed away in March.
Oh, sorry to hear that.
Yeah, thank you so much. She had ALS, and it was a nasty, nasty disease. I haven't been to your meetings for quite a while for that very reason. However, I was just thinking about your flat earthers,
Yeah.
And it reminds me of when I was younger. I found that I was a very easy victim of people pulling my chain. And if I said something, they would take the opposite stand. And I think these flat earthers know damn well there's no flat earth, that it's perfectly round, but they like to see us squirming around, trying to find reasons to convince them otherwise. And they're never going to be convinced. They will just always remain flat earthers just because they're ornery, and they're not about to listen to reason, and they just love the situation they're in, that they're raising a little concern among a group of people and wasting their time.
Yeah, I think you're describing trolls, and it certainly is. In fact, maybe most of the flat earthers on the internet might be what we call trolls, that are just yanking people's chain, trying to get a reaction. But there are some that are genuinely committed, the ideologues, and I think poor Bruce Lacey is in that bunch. So he's been caught up in this conspiracy belief where he thinks he's woke and he can see the truth, where those scientists are still confused and addled. But it's impossible with either one to have a rational discussion or to try to convince them to come around, because the ideologue, the the facts roll off their skin like water off a duck's back. Facts don't affect them. And the troll, you know, they know you've got the facts. They're just pulling your chain. So, but it's the people that don't know the ins and outs of these conspiracies that need to go, oh yeah, the Earth is round. Here's a simple experiment you can do with an elevator. I mean, if you are on the ground at a ground level and the sun sets, if you hop in an elevator and go up 20 stories, you'll probably see the sun set a second time. You can use the time difference and the height difference to calculate the radius of the Earth. So, so I think it's important to, get those kind of stories out there, where the people that might be on the fence go, oh yeah, that's silly. That's just some troll trying to pull somebody's chain.
It's like flying westbound across the Atlantic at around twilight and the sun seems to stand still.
Oh yeah.
Have you ever had that experience?
I have a very long plane sunset. Yeah, it's great. Oh, alrighty. Any other comments? Good to hear from Joe. Alrighty. Well, so next month we'll have Mick West and got some action items. So hope everybody has a great evening, and we'll catch you next time.
All right, bye.
All right. Oh,
Thank you.
over and out. Thanks, Mick.
So long.
Thanks, Dave.
Toodles. TTFN.